Good afternoon, everybody. Today is May 21st. It's Global Accessibility Awareness Day. So it's a great day for us to be doing a webinar on accessibility. So I want to welcome everybody to today. We're going to be talking about document accessibility as a process and not a project. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. If you have any technical questions or audio issues during the webinar, Susan Lee will be monitoring the chat. So if you look on the toolbar for Zoom, you'll see the chat box. If you click on the chat box, you can talk to Susan and she can assist you with any technical issues or answer any questions you have that really aren't about the presentation. If you have questions that you want us to answer at the end of the webinar, we'll have a Q&A session. So click on the Q&A box and just feel free throughout the presentation to ask any questions that you'd like us to answer, and then we will answer your questions at the end of the webinar. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So I'm David Herr. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Common Look, and I have with me Megan Carey, who's one of our senior document accessibility consultants. We've been working with a lot of our California clients for the last, I think, 6 or 7 years at this point. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Megan, and she's going to go ahead and get started with our presentation.
Thanks, Dave. And before we dive into our presentation, we always think it's important to kind of talk about who we are and possibly why we're even bringing these topics up. So to give a little background, if this is your first time attending our webinars, Common Look has been in the PDF accessibility space for a little over 20 years now. We have offices in Arlington, Virginia, Canada, and Australia. And not only do we provide remediation services, we also provide software for PDF accessibility. The software ranges from PDF accessibility, Office accessibility, testing tools. We're going to dive into those as we kind of go through the slides and continue the conversation on a project kind of versus the process of accessibility. So on our first slide, Dave, if you want to slide down, we felt that this topic was really important to bring up. We have been working specifically with California and the AB-434 project a lot more in the last couple years, but we have been in California space well over 6 or 7 years. And it kind of shows how it is a process, even though we had some deadlines in the last couple years, that maybe it was treated like a project for a little space and time. And as we've grown and as documents are continuing to be created, it turns into a process, and we really wanted to focus on that because we have, personally, I have experience where people kind of get assigned accessibility as their job that maybe wasn't before. And in that state of mind, it's like, oh, I'm just going to get through this project and we'll be able to move on. Because documents are constantly created, the accessibility portion needs to be part of the authoring process. So that's really where our tools come in play, and the conversation sort of starts with that. Let's look at where these documents are created and create a long-term program. One of the other hot topics for this situation is the QA process. If you are doing a whole bunch of work to make your website or your PDF documents accessible, you want to make sure that you're doing it the correct way. So that's one of the topics we hear all the time. And one thing that we really like to point out is because it's a process and not a one-time project, it's really important to get an entire organization involved and to really have the power and empowerment behind the process so you can get things done. The accessibility portion can take time and it can be laborious. And if an organization doesn't include the people that can make things happen, you can get stuck. And so we want to address these topics as sort of things that we've run into in the past to try to help people avoid them if possible. So Dave, if you can go to the next slide. Narrowing down some of the topics that we wanted to cover today, is why document accessibility is different from website accessibility. So PDF versus HTML. We're going to dive into that a little bit. Why, what we kind of covered, why it shouldn't be looked at as a single project and the reasonings behind that. We have a multi-phase program that we have recommended multiple times to different agencies and organizations that's been very, very successful. And so we are constantly trying to share information and experiences that we've had. So we want to touch base on that. We've also brought up the QA testing, which is extremely important. As I mentioned, we don't want to do all this work and be testing to the wrong standards or not actually be compliant when we think we are. Remediation, how it can affect your long-term goals. Outsourcing remediation work can seem like a one-time fix, but what we've noticed is that you'll always have that need. And we'll talk about that a little bit further. It ties in with our hybrid approach, so we'll touch base on that. And we have a few examples of successful California programs. So I'm going to share some of the best practices that I've seen and the things that we've seen really work to get to that end goal of accessibility. And then of course, open it up to QA as Dave mentioned, but feel free to throw any questions in there while we're talking. And perfect. So one of the questions we get asked a lot, we're laser focused on PDF accessibility. That's what we've been doing for 20 years. But we do get a lot of questions about website or maybe other accessibility services over the years. We get a lot of requests, maybe captioning, other things that we have partners or we have people that we can recommend. But the big differences between accessibility for a website and for PDFs, websites are template based. So when you're building the website, you can actually build accessibility into the design, what makes it a little bit easier than when you're dealing with documents. And another factor is that when you have a website, usually there's only a few people that control how this site is going to be built. And as you know, with documents in an organization, there's multiple departments usually, and each department is going to have their own set of documents. So it sort of adds to a little bit of an issue when it comes to, or maybe makes it more challenging, I should say, when you're dealing with a website versus documents specifically. And one of the other topics that we wanted to bring up as well is there's not really a lot of testing tools out there that will test both website and documents. So when it comes to AB-434 or any organization that's trying to be compliant, you want to make sure that you're covering both sides. You need your website and your documents to be accessible. Common Look has partnered with Moncito. Moncito checks the HTML portion of a website, and Common Look Clarity is actually integrated into the Moncito tool so that you can test your PDFs as well through the Moncito tool. So that is available for you. And then moving on to the next slide. This kind of points out how AB-434 cannot be looked at as a single project because there's constantly going to be changes and there's going to be testing that needs to be done. As you know, even if you post a document and it's from 2019 and you need to change it to 2020, you're still making changes on the document. That example might not entail a complete overhaul and new remediation project that needs to be done. But it kind of shows that simple changes constantly have to occur. So a lot of times we talk about prioritization and really looking at what's on your website as the very, very first step of evaluating what you need to do to be compliant. When you do that, you're getting a scope of what needs to be done to make your site compliant. You're analyzing the documents. You're going through everything that's posted. This changes a lot, even after you complete a whole batch of remediation work, if that's what you choose to do. Then you need to go through the process again and assess the documents to see if they're still accessible. That is one of the biggest points that I like to make on the fact that it's not just one project, because you are going to be constantly updating things. Dave, if you want to go to the next slide.
Absolutely, yeah, no doubt. So with that, we're going to talk about something Common Look's developed over the years. Over the years. We've developed a multi-phase document accessibility plan. And the good thing about that is we've then looked at, well, what's needed for each of these areas of these steps. And we've developed software tools or training programs or information for clients to address each and every one of these areas, so that this is something any organization can take, adopt it, make it part of how they do business, and then be assured that they're going to have accessible documents on their website. It's a 5-phase plan, and we're going to go through each of the phases, so I won't read this out, but we'll talk about each of these in depth. But the first one is the assessing and then creating the plan. When you think back to when AB-434 came out, and a lot of agencies looked at their website and realized they had thousands of documents and they had a July 1st deadline. And it's like, so how, you had to assess your plan, figure out what you're going to do. I got all these documents. How are we going to get them remediated? How are we going to quickly get this done by the time frame? You have the actual work that you have to do. So once you've figured out what the situation is, fixing the errors, working through the documents. The proactive part is really about making accessibility part of your organization's how you do business, part of your culture. So we're going to talk about that one. And then creating and expanding a training program, because you're not going to do this completely outsourced. You're probably going to want to do some in-house work as well. So we'll talk about that. And then finally, how you do the monitoring to assure that you are continuing to be in compliance going forward. So this 5-step plan, it's been adopted by lots of organizations, lots of agencies, both commercial companies and government agencies and nonprofits. So it's a proven plan. It's something over the last 21 years we've built our tools around, and we continue to work on adjusting our tools to meet what the requirements are. So let's talk about the first phase. You got to assess and you plan. So I've been handed a project, and I have to get my website in compliance, and we've been ignoring documents like most organizations have. Our typical clients, have been working on accessibility for many years, but documents tended to be something that was put to the back burner. The HTML, the website, getting the templates created so that they're now accessible, ensuring that website, you worked with a screen reader, all those good things are things that most organizations have a pretty good handle on today, and they've been building their websites to get them in compliance or to continue to keep them in compliance. But as Megan had said earlier, documents tend to be that thing that are created by all kinds of authors. They're not normally authored with accessibility in mind. Some of it's just because the tools are so easy. I mean, anyone can go into Microsoft Word, create a document, save it as a PDF, and now create content that they may now send to the webmaster and say, publish this on the website. This is our budget for the 2021 budget, so please publish that out there. But was it made accessible? Does it work with a screen reader? Are you creating inaccessible content and publishing it to your accessible website? So you got to be able to figure out, what are your goals? What are your requirements? I think we all can agree that all of us have the requirements to make our websites accessible. But what are the goals? What can be achieved in a short period of time? Let's say you have a July 1st deadline for AB-434 compliance, and you have to have 20,000 documents that equals almost 100,000 pages made accessible by that date. That may not be achievable. You may have to go through and figure out the prioritization of those documents, which ones are most important. So maybe the newer budget. So let's say you have a law requirement that says you have to keep 7 years of your budget up on the website. Well, you're definitely going to work on 2021 and 2020 and 2019, but the 7-year-old budget file may be the last one you do. You still need to do it, or you need to remove it from your website if it's now at this point not necessary to keep up there. So you're going to prioritize which documents you're going to work on, and you're going to create your policy. That our policy going forward is going to be around documents need to be accessible and made accessible before they're published. Not that, we're going to just see what happens, which is what is so typical. So assessing, planning, figuring out what it is you need to do. So how do I test? Well, there's tools out there that you can scan your website, find the documents, find out what the accessibility issues are with the documents, and then that lets you create an inventory of where you need to do your work. Our Common Look Clarity tool is a tool that's often used for scanning websites and doing that audit. So that's phase one, assessing and planning. So the second phase is, now that we've assessed the website, we've figured out what documents we need to work on, now we got to go fix them. And traditionally, you're going to fix them. There's really only one way to do it. You're going to open them up in Adobe Acrobat, and you're going to remediate the documents for accessibility. You're going to add tags if they're not tagged, and then you're going to go through the tag tree and work on reading order and alt text and all those other good things. The way you're going to approach a large project, whether it's going to be internal, you're going to do it in-house, or you're going to outsource it to other people, or you're going to do some kind of, we're going to do some of it in-house and we're going to do some of it outsourced, is something you need to consider based on time, effort, resources, a number of different things. Finding a vendor to do the work. And then if you're doing the remediation, again, what tools are you going to use to do the remediation? As I said earlier, traditionally you'd use Adobe Acrobat. There's much better tools out on the market. The Common Look PDF tool is used by many government organizations because it's much faster and much more efficient and creates compliance reports that show compliance with the standard. So fixing the errors is going to be your next step, and we'll talk a little more about that on the next slide. So again, if we're going to fix the documents, do we do this internally or do we do this on an outsourced basis? Internally, has a lot of advantages. You can get software that will assist you with doing the job properly and ensuring with compliance reports that the results when you're done, showing that you've done both the manual checks and the things that can have some automation done to speed up the process. Learning to do it in-house is a much more long-term approach, because you're going to now be able to, as content is created, make sure it's accessible before you publish it. So that's got all those advantages. Obviously, the disadvantages are you have to have the resources to be able to do it. You have to have the knowledge to be able to do it, and there's going to be a learning curve. So if you're faced with, I have to do a lot of documents in a short period of time, doing it internally may not be your best option. The outsourcing approach has a lot of advantages from a size and scale standpoint. If you can kick off a large project with a vendor, send them the documents, get them back by a guaranteed time, and you're going to make sure that you meet your time frame and what the costs are. It's probably going to be more expensive than doing it internally. And you have to be really careful with the quality of what you're getting from your vendor, because you do have to make sure that just because you paid somebody to do your remediation does not mean that what you're now publishing to your website is 100% compliant. So your own QA program, some way to be able to do the testing, asking them to provide accessibility reports that show checkpoint by checkpoint the documents meet the standards. Those are all the kinds of things that you're going to want from an outsourced remediation partner. And we'll talk a little bit more about our hybrid approach, but a lot of organizations will do a little bit of both. They'll use outsourcing for quick projects or large projects, and they'll do internal work for the smaller amounts, and they'll ramp it up over time. So phase two is fixing the errors. The third phase to our program is about being proactive, and it's really about building accessibility into the culture of your organization. The governor of California, signed AB-434, and it became, a regulation or a law. And that it was great because it's done for the right reasons, and it's ensuring that everyone has equal access to assets on the internet. So that's a fantastic thing. But creating it and putting it into practice is another thing. As I said earlier, the tools to create PDF documents are all over the map as far as accessibility. Word and PowerPoint do have some accessibility checkers built into them, and if you follow those when you create documents, you're going to create more accessible documents. They're not necessarily going to be completely standards compliant, but they're going to be better. They're at least going to have alt text, and they're at least going to possibly have heading levels if you're using the tool properly. But then there's other tools that create PDFs that just create completely inaccessible PDFs. There's, of course, our favorite, the scanned PDF, which is really just a picture of the document. So that's completely inaccessible unless it's been OCR'd and then tagged and then made accessible. So you need to get in your organization an understanding from the top down on document accessibility, what it is, why it's important, why it needs to become part of the authoring process. When I create a document in Microsoft Word, the expectation should be when I send it out to the organization that I've checked it for accessibility before I send it out. It shouldn't be that it has to be fixed later on, after the case. It's always going to be more expensive if you have to add accessibility at the end of the cycle instead of doing it during the authoring stage. So another thing to keep in mind is just because Microsoft Word will let you drop content into the document doesn't mean you should. And one of the things that causes Microsoft Office documents to be inaccessible is their flexibility in that you can cut and paste and drop things into the document, but dropping inaccessible content into a document is now going to make that document have all kinds of accessibility issues that may not be easily fixed. So creating across your organization the understanding of accessibility, why it's required, why it's important, why it's now part of your new culture is key to making this all happen. So then the fourth phase. So if we've done this and we've educated everybody on accessibility and why it's important and why we need to do it, we now need to teach people how to do it, how to put it into practice. And this can be done in many different ways. It's going to start with that authoring process. It's going to start with Microsoft Office classes from the standpoint of authoring with accessibility in mind. You can also use tools to assist you with this accessibility, testing and checking and creation. So Common Look has a tool that plugs into Office. So once you've created your document, if you follow the general accessibility rules, when you use Common Look Office then to generate the PDF, it's going to do the tagging properly. It's going to make sure the tables are tagged properly. It's going to make sure all the rest of the checkpoints which you go through are checked off. So when you're creating PDF documents out of a tool like that, you can then rest assured that you're going to have accessible content. Training of your staff is going to be key, and when you have a large staff, training to scale can be an issue. So what Common Look has done is we offer training classes. We offer training classes on site. We can train people in large groups with some restrictions, but to a certain group size. We can also train the trainer. So we can train your organization's accessibility team or training department to then allow you to then train your folks. So, our goal from our standpoint is if we can transfer that knowledge over to our clients, then they're going to be successful in their work and they're going to be successful in creating accessible content. So training is huge and it's key. We've also added to our portal all of our training materials, all of our videos, all of our knowledge base on how to create accessible content and how to use the tools to create accessible content is all now freely available to clients on our knowledge base. So support at commonlook.com has all that content, and it's a great tool for organizations. So training is going to be key. If step 2 was to spread the word and to make this part of the culture and to get the organization thinking accessibility, phase 4 is when you put that into practice and you actually teach and train everyone in how to use the tools and how to create accessible content. And then the 5th phase to this is going to be monitor. So if we followed all those steps, we found our documents, we fixed our documents, we made the organization aware of accessibility, we did training of our staff. The 5th phase is are we sure that we're in compliance? So if we use the AB-434 model, July 1st, every CIO had to sign a letter, put it on their website saying their website was now in compliance and their content was accessible. Well, a year's going by. It'll be July 1st in another 2 months. And we'll be actually less than that. And so when we get to July 1st, that process will repeat itself. So how does an organization be sure that nothing's changed in the last year. Documents, of course, we know documents have been published to the website since last year. And, are those documents accessible? So you need to have a compliance program. You need to have a compliance monitoring system in place where you're either before it's published, it goes through a QA team who checks the documents and says, yes, documents are accessible, they can be published, or by testing against the website itself and just checking to make sure that everything that's been published is accessible. There are tools, again, that you can get to monitor your HTML content and your PDF content. Our Common Look Clarity tool, again, if you're going to use that at the beginning of the process, it's a great tool then to use throughout the process to do those audit compliance reports, test your website. If you see new content that's been published and it's not accessible, then you can chase it down, figure out what needs to be done, get it fixed, and get it republished. And then next time you run the report, you'll be in compliance. So that's our 5 phases: assess and plan, fix the errors, be productive, proactive, training and expanding the program, and then monitoring your website for compliance. So that's the program. It works, it's proven, organizations use it, and it's something we can assist any organization with doing. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Megan to talk about how to set up a QA program.
Thanks, Dave. That was perfect leading into once you have this program set up, now we need to make sure that it's running correctly, right? QA is very, very important as doing all this work to make your site and your documents accessible. It doesn't really mean anything if you're not testing to the correct standard or level that you need to be at. So a couple of things to note is that make sure you have an efficient tester. I know that for the state of California, the standards that they need to adhere to is WCAG 2.0 and 2.1. So when it comes to the testers with Adobe Acrobat, the checker does not actually adhere to any standards or check to any standards. PAC3 will check to PDFUA, and then Common Look PDF checks to all of the standards, including WCAG 2.0 and 2.1. So when it comes to testing, they're all free. So I always recommend that if you're going to pick one, obviously being a little biased, I would recommend the Common Look PDF Validator, just because for the simple fact that if you're going to do all of this work to make sure that it's compliant, you want to make sure that you're using the correct checker. So when it comes to different things that it won't test, sometimes when it comes to color contrast, you will not be, you don't have to check that at all with Adobe, and you don't have to check that with PAC3. Common Look PDF will show that it requires user verification. So another user verification note is for language. You could have the checkbox for English, but it could, if it's not pinged to you, it could be set to read in German. So when it goes through the screen reader, if it's not tested correctly, it could sound very wrong to the end user. So the bottom line is we try to avoid any time that when you could go through all this work to make something accessible, the testing is correct so you're getting the correct output. We really try to stress that. And if they're all free, my point is why not use the one that tests for everything? Even though I know I'm a little biased. Dave, if you can go to the next one.
Yeah, no worries. I was just going to add to that. In some QA departments, just to play it safe, you'll use multiple tests. So maybe you'll run it against the Adobe Checker and it passes. And then you'll run it against PAC3 and Common Look and then say, yes, all the tools are saying basically the document's meeting the standards. You might test it with a screen reader as well if you're proficient in using a screen reader. So again, you might use multiple tools, but the nice thing is that the PAC3 and the Validator tool are free. So with that, I will switch it over to the next slide.
Perfect. And when it comes to a long-term solution or meeting your goals, we touch base on remediation. For Common Look, we actually call our remediation services the easy button of accessibility. So the reason for this is you can take all of your documents and send them over to our remediation team and have them fix the files and send them back to you. When we send them back, they come with a compliance report that is on the screen right now, basically walks you through every single checkpoint and shows you where that passes, where it was verified that it's correct. It's extremely valuable. The most efficient, easy way is to outsource the files to a vendor to get them remediated. That being said, a price factor falls in line with this. I know for Common Look and most vendors, the pricing is priced per page and it's based off complexity. So when you're looking at your long-term goals, when we talk about prioritizing, that's really what you want to look into when you're thinking about outsourcing. So when it comes to the hybrid approach, we really try to help organizations manage the most cost-effective and most efficient way to get your documents remediated. Sending everything to Common Look to have them remediated is not really a long-term solution. Our hybrid approach is to teach you how to remediate in-house, but also know that the remediation services is available whenever the time need be. So for example, you can set up a whole remediation team and have built a program, have everything running smoothly. If a file comes up that is very, very complex and it's going to take a very long time for your team to remediate, sometimes you want to look into remediation services just for those one-off documents. So as a long-term solution, that's what we recommend, and really evaluate where do I see the cost savings? What's the most efficient way for me to get these files remediated? And usually it's a combination of both. Dave, you can go to the next slide. For Common Look, we have made the remediation process as easy as possible, and I just really wanted to reiterate this because even though so the first step would be to send Common Look the file. We evaluate the file and we send back a quote and a turn time. We do not move forward until we get approval from you to move forward. So a lot of times I tell organizations, there's no obligation, get a quote. If you're evaluating whether you want to bring a document in-house or outsource, get a quote to see how much it would cost. So a lot of times it's a red flag if a document's going to be extremely expensive to remediate. Maybe you should look into other ways to post the document. If it's a document that doesn't have to be posted as a PDF and it can avoid the process, then you want to go ahead and go for that. But when a price tag is added to a document on how much it's going to cost, it really helps with the priorities and to evaluate whether you should bring it in-house or outsource to Common Look. Dave, if you want to go to the next slide. So that being said, this is sort of an overview of what our hybrid approach looks like. On the right, we have the remediation team that you can outsource to. As I mentioned, the easy button, it's always available to you and you can always get a quote at any time. But we ultimately want to teach you how to build a team and do the process internally. The reason for this ties as well into this not being a project and being a long-term process. If you can build a team that can remediate your own documents, there's a significant cost savings. And when it comes to creating accessible documents and remediating, when you have a team trained, it's easier to take control of what's going on with what gets put on your website. So when it comes to building a team, there's a few ways to look at it. Some of the examples that I'll go over with what we've done with California agencies is the hybrid approach includes our Office tool and a PDF tool. As Dave's mentioned earlier, if you can create an accessible PDF from the beginning and the authoring stage, it's a lot less work to do in the end. So our ratio for organizations when it comes to our Office tool is much higher than our PDF tool. And the reason for that is the goal is to get an entire organization to really think about accessibility at the creation point. You're alleviating a lot of work on the back end. And then when you have this process in place, you have your smaller group that's doing specifically PDF remediation. So all of those documents that were already converted into a PDF, they're not urgent. Maybe some of the documents that Dave referenced where, we're not going to go past anything 2, 3, 4 years down the road. but we do need to get to them. Those are what your remediation team is going to focus on. And setting up training for that is extremely important in regards to both of the tools. So ultimately the goal is everyone's creating accessible PDFs in Office, and the smaller portion are remediating in PDF. So when it comes to training, you want to make sure that, Dave mentioned that we can train the trainer. This is an approach that I've seen work very, very well in a lot of the agencies. We have annual licenses. So you can basically decide, we're going to train 100 people this year. Next year, we'll train 200 people. And you can scale it, which is also very important as far as a long-term solution. As you are remediating documents and making sure that everything's getting posted, it's going to be accessible from the beginning, you want to really monitor and report anything that comes up new. So in that phase where you're monitoring and you're reporting, it's really where you're going to do an assessment of what do we need for next year. Are we creating less PDFs that need to be remediated? Maybe we don't need as many licenses. It's an ongoing process that is continually, it's based off the reports and determining what files you have. And then Dave, if you want to go to the next slide. I've kind of touched base on a few different agencies that have done the hybrid approach and had a lot of success. I pull my experience from different areas and kind of create the ultimate workflow. Every agency, every organization, they're all extremely different. So some agencies might hardly have any PDFs, and it's mostly going to be websites based that they need to make the website accessible. It all can range. The most success that I've seen is the hybrid approach, prioritizing the documents from the very beginning. One of the agencies that had the most success, they prioritized and sent us the top documents that needed to be remediated years ago. They had to jump on this. They sent everything over. They knew their most crucial files were remediated and they were posted. Everything else from there was assessing and determining whether it even needed to be on the website. A lot of organizations, not so much anymore, but in the beginning, they used the website as a place to hold documents. They weren't really necessary, but they were just there so people could grab them if they needed them. That creates a lot of extra work when you're trying to adhere to the standards. So if you can pull it down, pull it down. And then once we had an assessment of a scope of how many documents we had, that's when you really dive in. As Dave mentioned, we use Clarity. We dive in, pull up a report showing all the PDFs, which ones are top priority. If they're top priority, do we need to outsource them? How fast do we need this done? From there, we start assessing the training. If you have an organization that has 20,000 people that are creating PDFs, you really want to get in there and teach them how to use Office correctly. The longer you go, the more you're building of PDFs that you have to remediate on the back end. So education is really, really important, as well as testing and getting your scope and scale of how many people are posting. From there, you take your smaller group and you assess the priority of the PDFs and how fast they need to be remediated. Even when we have batches of documents that Common Look is remediating, those have to be prioritized as well. A lot of times when we get projects, it's usually get to done as fast as you possibly can. So priorities come very quickly in making those assessments. And sometimes if we get 200 files that need to be remediated, we'll assess them by maybe which ones need alt text, which could slow down the workflow. There's different ways that you can measure how you need to manage the projects. And within the smaller projects, it's giving you a scope of the larger process. So I'm kind of jumping around there, but basically it's a tier where you have Office, you have PDF, and you have your documents that you outsource to remediate. When you have a combination of those three areas, you're eliminating the files that need to be remediated if you're creating them the right way. You're fixing the PDFs that have already been created, and then you're integrating the documents that were remediated by outsourcing it. From there, you just continue to use Clarity as a monitoring service. Another benefit that came from AB-434 and communicating with these organizations that had a very large scale to work with is the knowledge base portal that Dave mentioned. A lot of times, someone that's creating PDFs is all of a sudden told, hey, you need to make them accessible, and it's a little overwhelming. So Common Look wanted to create a way where we could introduce someone to how accessibility works, provide the solution, the software for them, and provide the resources. So when it comes to Common Look Office, that is a solution that you can give to a person that's creating the documents, and then reference them to the knowledge base portal, and they will have everything that they need to make the documents accessible. With PDF, that's where we focus on the training and train the trainer. Kind of circling back to that. So that is my really quick overview of some of the successes that we've had. I know it's a lot of information, but it's been really working well for different agencies. And Dave, if you want to open it up to QA, have you had anything to add to the hybrid approach?
No, just that we've seen more and more agencies adopting, a sustainable document accessibility program. And I think it may be a good idea, specifically in California, to reach out to some of your fellow agencies that have built successful programs. Reach out to Megan; she can tell you probably who some of those agencies are, and learn from your peers. See how they're doing it. You guys aren't alone. Everybody has the same problem, and we're all working towards the same goals. So with that, we're going to jump into some of the questions. I see there's several so far, so let me read some of the questions and we'll go through this. So the one question was, do you have experience with the SiteImprove tool for PDF accessibility checking? I don't have experience with it, but I'm familiar with it. I know that SiteImprove added that to their tool a couple years ago, I believe. And my understanding is that it's fairly general in what it's checking for. So it's sort of like the Adobe Checker, where it's looking for some of the common things in a PDF. So first of all, is the PDF tagged or is it not tagged? If it's not tagged, by default, it's going to kick it out as not being accessible. And it's probably looking then for some of the other common things, presence of alt text. I'd have to go look at what's current on their website to be able to tell you the exact differences. What I can tell you with certainty, though, because I know this from talking to the SiteImprove folks, our tool is far more comprehensive in checking to the standards, because we actually go to the WCAG 2.1, 2.0 AA, PDF UA, or whatever the standard you're choosing. We go to that standard on a deep level and go checkpoint by checkpoint. And then the person that's doing it will manually verify, yes, I've checked the alt text is sufficient, or the alt text is not sufficient. So our checking tools are very thorough and are checkpoint by checkpoint. So SiteImprove does have a PDF testing component, and I'm aware of that. Monsita, who also has something similar, is actually using our Common Look Clarity technology. So they have the same level of reports as what we do. So the second question was, can you talk more about made to tag for InDesign? That is something, and Megan, I don't know if you can answer to this. I can give a general answer, and really somebody like Paul Reyes, one of our trainers, could give more details. InDesign, has accessibility features built into it, and it is getting more, it's able to create more accessible content than it used to be able to do so. But there is a whole learning curve of creating documents in InDesign with accessibility in mind, and there's a lot of gotchas that you can do that will create all kinds of accessibility problems. So I can't talk to any kind of a depth because I'm not technical, I'm on the marketing side. But if you do reach out to Megan after the webinar, we can get you in touch with somebody that can answer more of your questions on that. We got another question that says, when would one use Common Look Validator versus using Common Look Clarity? That question is pretty simple. Validator is spot check. Validator is something you use for an individual file. So if I'm running a QA program and I'm testing content before it's published to the website, so let's say your authoring process is the document's created by the author, and then it goes to people that, you know, or the supervisor or somebody that does the approval of the content and says, yes, this is ready for the web. And then if it goes to a QA team, somebody in the QA team could then use Common Look Validator to process the document, look at the tags, walk it through accessibility checker, and then confirm that the document meets the standard and can be published, or it still has accessibility issues. The Clarity tool is a bulk or a volume tool, so you're going to use it against an entire batch of documents. It could be a folder on your network of files that need to be scanned, or typically it's going to be on a website, so you're scanning an entire website looking for all the documents, and you're going to get an inventory that's going to show you every single file, what the URL is of the file, and then you can go into individual file by file checkpoints to determine what needs to be worked on or what is accessible. So Validator's for single files, Clarity is for in bulk. And then the last question I have here says, do you know of any state of California agencies that offer remediation services with Common Look? Megan, can you answer that?
Yes, I do know of a state agency that offers remediation services to other state agencies, and they have our software. Yes.
So reach out to sales@commonlook.com, mcarey@commonlook.com, and we can answer that, give you more details on that if you'd like to have more information. Susan, I see there was a lot of stuff in the chat. Was there any questions that came in through the chat?
No, I don't think so. I think we're good.
Okay. So I don't see any other questions. So in the interest of everyone's time, we will go ahead and end our webinar today. I want to thank everybody for attending. The little bit of housekeeping at the end here, we will be sending out a captioned version of the recording of the webinar. So everyone that's registered, we will be sending that out. We are continuing to do webinars through June. We have a number of technical webinars, so feel free to check that out in our spring 2020 webinar series off of our website. If you have any questions, or if there's content you want to see in future webinars, please reach out to us. Please let you know what you'd like to see. We're really concentrating on education and helping our clients get the best use out of tools and be as knowledgeable as possible on document accessibility. So reach out to us at sales@commonlook.com and let us know your questions, comments, or content you'd like to see. And I hope that everybody enjoys the rest of their day, and be safe and take care.